Welcome to Humanist Views, a program where we look at current issues from a humanist point of view. I'm Scott Lohman. On tonight's program, we're going to step away from looking at current issues and talk about more of humanism and philosophy, and then also Unitarianism. My guest tonight is going to be an expert on that subject, so we're going to take a look at where humanism and Unitarianism overlap, as well as the differences between the two. So joining me tonight is Dr. David Breeden. Welcome, David.
Thank you.
And you are the new minister at First Unitarian Society.
First Unitarian Society of Minneapolis, yes.
And that's a venerable institution in both Unitarianism and humanism, isn't it?
Absolutely. The term religious humanism was invented by one of the ministers at First Unitarian.
So we can take that to Minnesota. That's really cool.
Yep.
Even though most people don't know what we mean when we talk about religious humanism.
We'll remind them.
Okay, so we can start talking about that. So tell me a bit about yourself. How did you become a Unitarian minister?
Well, I was a English professor in my first career for 25 years. I'm a poet. I studied with Allen Ginsberg. I was very interested in the Beat poets and went into literature from there. Did that, and then I retired and became a Unitarian minister.
Okay, and this is not your first society or church, depending on how they like to label themselves, correct?
That is correct. I was first in Wisconsin, and then I came to Bloomington, Minnesota, and now here.
Okay. So what got you interested in Unitarianism?
Well, I was raised a Pentecostal, and so fundamentalist, holy roller kind of religious background in the southern part of Illinois, very southern culturally there. And so that was what I knew until I went off to college. And when I went away to college, I discovered the Unitarians, Ralph Waldo Emerson, Thoreau, the Transcendentalists. And from there, it's history. I became a Unitarian, and I have been ever since.
Okay. Yeah, it's always interesting that the fundamentalists are scared of people going off to college because you start thinking.
Critical thinking is a dangerous thing, isn't it?
Yeah, and that's what gets people to, humanism, Unitarianism, and away from the strict fundamentals. So on that, was there any interesting steps along that journey as you went through it, or was it fairly quick?
Well, for me, the real question was the difference between fundamentalist teachings and what I saw as a much more liberal kind of Christianity that was being beaten down within the text. I was encouraged as a kid to actually read the Bible.
Okay.
And when I actually read the Bible, I saw a kind of socialist, bomb-throwing revolutionary Jesus punished by the state for what he was saying in terms of being against power and for the poor. That didn't seem to be what my Pentecostal preacher was talking about.
Okay, so you saw that, what was going on and then started looking around and seeing that, especially also reading the Bible.
Right. There was a disjunction between what I was hearing, which was in the late 60s, and so my minister was pro-Vietnam, anti-miniskirt, and I just didn't see any of that going on in the actual text as reading it.
That's interesting when you can find where that's, something's not computing here.
Exactly. So that disjunction began to feed into my thinking, and so when I went off to college, I became a literature major. As I say, I was reading the beatnik poets, and who were not exactly mainstream, shall we say.
Oh, definitely not. Yeah, that's a very interesting era. I like the fact that right now right-wingers, or at least those on that end of the political spectrum, like to say, if it wasn't for the 60s, the whole thing would not have fallen apart. And it's like, I don't think it's quite that simple.
No, the more repressive it is, the more radical those acting out are, I think.
Yeah,
in fact.
Yeah. There's a main case for keeping things in the moderate middle, so you can keep an eye on those various ends that get a little crazy.
That's right.
Sometimes.
That's right.
On both ends of the spectrum.
You can avoid beatniks by staying in the middle.
By staying in the middle, or at least moderating, saying over here's not too bad, guys. You get over there, you move to crazy zone.
That's right.
So yeah, and the beatniks were definitely, because there was a lot of repression that we don't see people discussing much about the 50s.
Right,
on that part of it.
Well, right. Well, I mean, yes. Well, where do you want to start? The military policy, the atomic bomb. I mean, the policy was complete madness. Do you want to talk about the repression of women? Do you want to, et cetera? Where are you going to start?
A lot of things that needed the relief valve of the 60s. Well, we'll save that for another show. But let's now look at more at humanism and Unitarianism.
Okay.
So, our group, the Humanists of Minnesota, is a chapter of the AHA, the American Humanist Association, and they put out, I know you can't see it on camera, but this nifty little card that summarizes humanism, and it's just really handy. It's Humanist Manifesto, and it just says that humanism's a progressive philosophy of life that without supernaturalism affirms our ability and responsibility to lead ethical lives of personal fulfillment that aspire to the greater good of humanity. Yes. And that sort of covers that. Now, I know there's different strains within Unitarianism. So can you just sort of give us a basic overview of some of those and then what the more humanist ones are like?
Yeah, absolutely. Unitarian Universalism, as it's known today, is the amalgamation of two groups, Unitarians and the Universalists. The Universalists never really stopped being very, very liberal Christians.
Okay.
They didn't believe in hell, they didn't believe in punishment, but they did believe in a God, and they did believe that Jesus was in some way a child of God, or in some ways sacred, divine.
Okay.
Unitarians had already moved away from that way of thinking, although there were still some Christian Unitarians. For the most part, Unitarianism began after the Transcendentalists to move toward an idea that all human religions are in some way correct. And right, and going after the correct thing. And then when they began to think in that way, one of the things that they got to was that Jesus was probably just a very good human being.
Okay.
Therefore, Christianity was only one of a series of religious shots in the dark, trying to figure out what the mystery of the universe is about. And then along comes the humanist strain.
Okay.
And really, one of the main humanists in the denomination was John Dietrich, who was one of the ministers here in Minneapolis.
Okay. Yeah, and I know the Society offers copies of his sermons, and they must have some famous ones on humanism.
Oh, absolutely. If the World Became Humanist is when it was one of his books.
Okay.
So he more or less avoided the question, is there a God? Because he never really wanted to deal with that so much as how do we act in a world in a way that we know that in the final end, humans are the be-all and end-all of human action. God is not going to intervene. We know that just from the fact that we don't see it. So if that's the case, how do we act? And then the question of divinity becomes just a kind of an interesting, intellectual exercise.
Yeah, so it's not the main driving force on that is, what is this God dictating to us, but more of since there isn't anything visible coming, looks like we've got to solve our problems ourselves.
Yep, absolutely. I mean, John Dewey, who was an atheist and a humanist, and interested in Unitarians but never actually became one, said that God is the difference between the actual and the ideal. So the idea of divinity became very, very intellectual. Paul Tillich, one of the great philosophers, and nominally Christian at least, and a favorite of Unitarians in the 1950s, said that God can't exist because that would be a limitation on God, and God has no limitations.
That's where the philosophers get to have fun on that kind of stuff. So,
absolutely.
So what are some goals you have for First Unitarian Society?
First Unitarian Society is, as I see it, the flagship of religious humanism in the Unitarian Universalist denomination. It's where it was invented. It's where it really reached its peak in terms of the interest of the people who came. It has retained that kind of identity for many, many years, since the 1920s.
Okay.
And so even though Unitarian Universalism has many different religious traditions within it, Christianity, Buddhism, Hinduism, etc., even paganism, First Unitarian Society remains the flagship Unitarian congregation that is humanist.
Okay.
And
so it's to keep that tradition going as well, because that is amazing. So now you keep bringing up the thing of religious humanism.
Yes.
So give what the HA is, and that's pretty much naturalistic humanism without that. What's the difference?
To me, the difference is that religious humanists show up somewhere on Sunday morning.
Okay.
More or less. And we sing songs. Now, they probably don't have the word God in them, but we do sing songs. We do light candles. We believe that community is in some way enriched by the idea of ritual.
Okay.
So if you come to First Unitarian Society, you see a sort of Protestant church service on Sunday morning. And we do that as a way to ritualize life.
Okay.
Sunday morning is something that we do.
So that would be a big difference, because we, as just an association of humanists, meet a number of times during the year, but we don't have a set location, and we're definitely not meeting on Sundays. So.
Right. And I find that interesting, and it's perhaps we could think of ourselves as the conservative liberals in that, and religious liberals in that way, that we still want to have some sort of Sunday morning meeting in which we have a ritualized moment together.
And are there then, does the society take stands on other things in society, maybe looking at our political issues, or do you work on sort of educating to help people go in and tackle those issues?
Absolutely. I think, and this is true of all humanists, I think, after you reach the point in which you say that it's all our project, we primates who call ourselves human beings, we are responsible for this world and what we do to each other. After you get to that place, you have to act in some way to better the life. Since there isn't an afterlife for us to go to, since there's no God who's going to sweep down and fix human problems, we've got to do it ourselves. And after we realize that, it's a huge responsibility, I think. And we take that responsibility very, very seriously.
Yeah, and that is one of the differences with humanism as a naturalistic philosophy as well, because once we're to the point of most of us are atheists, or pretty much he's not there agnostics, show me more evidence. It's then, okay, then what do we do? Because, arguing about, the size of God, or what does he look like, or what's he doing? Does he answer his phone? What type of phone is he using? Then it's like, okay, now what are we going to do? We need to learn to get along. We need to, find ways of going, so how do we make sure our planet survives, once we deal with peak oil and climate change and those factors, and find ways of solving those problems?
Absolutely. And, after we decide that God didn't put poor people on the planet to be poor, people did.
Yes.
And after we accept that, then we have to accept the responsibility of fixing the problem.
Yeah, so those are the challenges that we're all facing on that part of it. As a society, what other programs do you have to offer to people?
We try to be educational and political at the same time, and so we have a lot of book discussions. We have a lot of discussion groups. We have a forum to which you are invited, and certainly experts in many, many fields. We want people to come and talk. The actual service on Sunday morning, I try to speak on something of interest to people, and we try to have inspiring music and that kind of thing. We also have a forum in which we take a more in-depth and discussion-oriented idea to try to communicate. And then we have a lot of book discussion groups and then things focused. One of the things I'm going to be doing in the fall is, which God don't you believe in? There's a wide variety of gods not to believe in, after all.
There are. There's a fun podcast I listen to, and their thing is they call it polyatheism, and they get to the end of discussing. Today we're going to discuss that, just another God not worth believing in. And they have fun because they'll take ones from very obscure parts of different pantheons. So it's a great way to get educated on that part of it.
I was going to make a list on just a list of gods, and I looked up at a Wikipedia, and there are too many to mention. There are too many to mention.
There's plenty to keep you out of mischief. But I also know that Unitarians have very good religious education. So not just on your own philosophically, but you take a look and even explore some of the other religions, correct?
Absolutely. We have a very, very strong religious education program and a religious education tradition among Unitarians. We have a lot of younger people who come just for the religious education for their children. The old joke as a Unitarian is parents with kids, they don't want to be atheists, maybe. They don't know. So we try to teach religion in a way that is respectful, but also open, so that, all right, let's look at Hinduism. We're not going to make fun of it. We're not going to belittle it. We're going to look at it as, what does this mean to the people who practice it? And it's interesting. We sometimes raise some kids who become various things.
Oh, I'm sure that can happen, but at least they're doing it because they've thought about it, rather than, like most people, continue in the religion they were born into.
Absolutely. One of the interesting things about American society in general now, I think, is that most people are not part of the religion they were born into today. Most Americans are not. But most of them move into another one that's more or less related to that one.
Okay.
So you might be born Catholic and then become a Presbyterian, which is just a slight movement. But most Americans no longer die in the religion they were born into. So one of the things that we do is try to be respectful and consider them all.
Yeah, because I'm sure that education helps a lot, because it's a complicated thing out there, especially since there's a great many of different sects or different denominations out there.
Absolutely.
And also know that Unitarianism has a very good sex education program as well.
Yes, Our Whole Lives it's called. We shared with the United Church of Christ, a very liberal Christian denomination, and developed this. And it was groundbreaking when we started it, and it is still groundbreaking. And we talk about sexuality, we talk about gender, and we talk about it openly. And with no shame involved. And the kids who come out of that know what they're talking about and what they're doing.
Which I think helps a lot, because those saying that abstinence education is the way to go, I always suggest, well, if that's such a good idea, let's try abstinence car, driver education, and see that they're going to go, no, it's not going to work for cars.
We know absolutely that where abstinence education is taught most, that's where most of the pregnancies are.
Yeah,
so,
it
works that way.
On that. And also, you guys are Unitarians are good in terms of science and critical thinking.
We believe very deeply that nothing that we believe can be unscientific. Belief must be hand in hand with science. That's been a tenet of Unitarianism since the 18th century.
Which is good, because that gives us, the solid basis for understanding our world, and then being able to know those tools to solve our problems.
Well, absolutely. If we find Noah's Ark tomorrow, we'll believe in it. I mean, that's one of the interesting things, and what I like about us is that we have a belief system that is impermeable to truth.
Yeah.
I mean, truth is what we really believe in. It's very interesting, John Calvin, that crazy Calvinist back there, believed in something that I still do believe in. He believed that truth revealed God, and God revealed truth, and therefore truth could not be bad. Now, it's interesting that Calvinists are not seen that way, but his kind of people started Harvard University way back there.
Okay.
And truth now has told us a few things that he wouldn't accept, but it's interesting, and we keep pursuing that truth is the basis of what we think and do.
Yeah, and I think many of us who came into the humanist traditions that were raised in another religion. I was brought up in what's now called ELCA Lutheranism, but was brought up in that. And for me, it was a quest for truth in starting to look at that, and then finding it's not holding together in these places, and doing that. In fact, part of my investigation is I was into science fiction And so therefore I was getting into UFOs. And so it was reading that and researching that. And all of a sudden I'm going, okay, guys, your stories are not matching up here. And these guys are telling this story that way, and it's coming from this way. And it's like, hello? Okay. So it was being able to start assessing that evidence and then going, maybe I'll start applying this to other things. So it's that type of thinking that gets many of us to where we are.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, conspiracy theories are fascinating in that way. They presuppose that the universe makes more sense than it really does, don't they?
Yeah, and that's the interesting thing about learning is when you look at the neat stories that's all it's in there, it's like, it's not quite that neat.
Yeah.
It'd be more fun if it was.
You know, it would make a better story, but truth is still
tends
interesting.
to be more messy. So where do you see Unitarianism, at least the humanist side of it, going in the next 10 to 20 years?
Well, I really think that it is our moment, and our moment meaning humanism and liberal religions, because we know that, well, I had a Christian friend who wrote a blog post, will the internet kill religion? And the answer is yes. Okay. As we know it,
Yeah.
It will, because authority must break down when you have information. So if you can read outside of your tradition, if you can read something besides what the nun is telling you or your mother is telling you in homeschool, when you can do that, then the world is opened up. And I think we live in that world now where information is there. It's there in sexuality, it's there in politics, it's there in religion. And after you begin to be cosmopolitan in that way of thinking, then you're going to be a different kind of person, and you're not going to fit into the clearly marked boxes that we have been living with for a very long time. They worked well when we all lived in villages and couldn't get around very well.
Definitely.
But now we don't do that.
Yeah, and I like that approach because, I've seen that in my lifetime. I grew up in a small southeastern Minnesota town, small library, probably didn't have any books on atheism or humanism. But for me, it was reading other novels and my quest through science fiction, which created other worlds and got me thinking on that got me moving. But now when we've got people on the internet where you can just type in the word atheist, which, you couldn't do, because, the people, the books, were harder to find. It opens up and people are willing to start asking those questions.
Absolutely. Although, it would be fun to be Isaac Asimov, for example, to slip in that humanist message and, kind of underneath the surface. But he was always going for that critical thinking and getting people to think outside the box.
Yeah, he definitely had that there. His writings, especially since he was a president of the American Humanist Association for a number of years, were very humanistic, even though he was talking about, a number of his things, more society-wide issues. He definitely had that humanist base in there, at least in his heroes or in the society he wanted to portray.
Yep, we have to think about our actions.
Yeah, so especially when you can look at like his Foundation series and that kind of stuff.
Absolutely. Yeah.
On that, because with that, novels of Robert Heinlein and Frank Herbert's Dune, for those of us of a certain age, those are seminal works in getting people thinking.
Absolutely.
When you start looking at how religion is set up in fiction.
Yeah. One step away, we're not really talking about this world.
Yeah, we're not talking about those sort of things. Yeah, that's where you get into that subversive stuff, which is why I like good storytelling. Because
Absolutely.
that, Chuck Colson and I, even though we didn't agree on a lot of things, we agreed that with fiction, it's a great way to look at the human condition.
Absolutely.
So we can learn things. So. Now, how do we make our philosophies a little more appealing to the nuns, those people who are no longer checking, Christian, Muslim, Hindu, they're checking no religion. How do we get them interested? Because they're just saying, they know they don't like fundamentalism of any stripe or anything like that, and they're moving away from the mainstreams. How do we get them to our camp where we can show them the human side of rational and critical thinking?
Well, I think that the main thing is community. Human beings need community. We exist in community, and we have better ideas in community. We can sit around drinking coffee and reading, and that's great. But if we don't carry that to someone else and start thinking about it, we can start boiling in our own minds, and we can get pretty far off the path. So sitting down and talking with other people helps us, I think, focus our own minds and our own thoughts. So community is very, very important. There's a stat that in 1960, the average American had 20 people they could contact to help them change a flat tire. Mm-hmm. Now most Americans have 2, and some have none. We need community. We are tribal animals. We develop that way. We need each other. And so I think community is the wave of the future, even for the absolute most individualistic, humanistic person. Because how else are we going to find like-minded people? We can watch TV all day, but that doesn't give us the human interaction that we need. So we
need that connection and that interaction, and so work on finding the niches where people can connect and find a greater connection to the world.
Absolutely. So it helps us intellectually, it helps us in conversation and social skills, and it helps us to change a flat tire. And there's nothing bad about community.
So once we've moved on that block, then Unitarians have a lot of great tools on educating, and so do Humanists on that. So
yes.
And we can look at the fun, because generally once people start finding out the fun of asking questions and getting answers, they're kind of hard to stop sometimes.
Absolutely. I love the mystery. Asking questions is the most fun of all. Finding out the answer, that's okay. But asking questions is a lot of fun.
Yeah, and that I sparked on because I watched on, because cable TV was coming of age when some of the NASA probes were getting to some of the planets. And the fun part was not them finding out what they thought they were going to find out, but going, oh, what is that? And the spark of having new questions to ask and new answers to find.
Absolutely. Karl Popper, great scientific philosopher. I love him because, he said science is what can be proven wrong.
Yep, so the questions going forward. Got about 20 seconds.
Okay.
What can we leave people with about either Unitarianism or, going forward, and humanism?
I think we have a bright future. Let's keep working. Sometimes we humanists go off in our own separate places, but we ought to stick together here, and we have a lovely future working together. And I look forward to working with the humanists here in Minnesota. Let's go. Sounds
good. That's great. Okay, so for more information about us, the Humanists of Minnesota, you can find us on our website at humanistupmn.org. We'd also you can find out more of our activities, when our meeting times are. You can join our meetup. We'd also like to hear what you think of this program. So send us an email or send us one of those old-fashioned letters. We'd love to hear from you on that. So I'd like to thank you for joining me on this edition of Humanist Views. I'm Scott Lohman. Good night.